Mr. Godsey, how many wrongful convictions are in U.S.?
It's impossible to really get an accurate number. We've identified over 2,200, over 2,200 wrongful convictions in the past 25 years. But for anybody who does this work, you realize that in every one of these cases you win, it's coincidence after coincidence. If this court reporter hadn't accidentally kept the evidence, or if this particular witness had actually died when they had cancer 10 years earlier, but they fortunately survived, you're able to free the person. So you look at anybody who studies this with an open mind would say, this is obviously the tip of the iceberg. Every one of these cases involves so much luck. Scholars have estimated it at about 4%, but I think it's impossible to know exactly.
Let's talk about the main causes of the wrongful conviction in U.S. and then all over the world, basing upon your experience, personal experience.
One of the things that's interesting is that different criminal justice systems in different countries have different procedures, and the courtroom may operate differently, but the causes of wrongful convictions we found are the same everywhere, which is basic human psychology, human failings. Humans, regardless of what country they're in, have very malleable, problematic memories. So eyewitnesses to a crime, but just by police questioning, they can have, innocent police questioning. The police aren't trying to change their testimony, but they can sometimes have their memory sort of altered to better fit the police theory of the crime through questioning. So eyewitnesses are often wrong. False confessions. I mean, this is something that's very hard for the average person to wrap their mind around and understand, but people who are innocent at a far rate than you would ever expect will confess under police interrogation to crimes they did not commit. Forensics. I mean, we have these shows like CSI that sort of hold up forensic sciences as the equivalent of some miracle like putting man on the moon. In reality, a lot of these are exported from the United States, and they're based on completely unreliable scientific foundations. And so many people are wrongfully convicted because of an expert who stood up on the courtroom in a white coat and said, this matches this and this person's guilty. Wrong. Bad defense lawyering. In the United States, what we call snitch testimony, or incentivized witnesses, where one of the people who they have an incentive to lie because the prosecution is going to give them leniency in their own case if they testify against somebody else. So many countries, it might shift. In some of the Asian countries where they allow harsher interrogations, false confessions is a higher percentage. Or some countries don't allow snitch testimony or incentivized witnesses. But generally speaking, it's confirmation bias, tunnel vision on the part of investigators, the problems with human memory and eyewitness identification, false confessions, all of these things that are present regardless of what procedures a particular country uses.
And what about the remedies in U.S. and, again, all over the world?
Most legal systems I've found have a procedure for reopening a case if new evidence is discovered. Most legal systems have that. What I've found in the biggest hurdles in Europe is that many of the countries do not have preservation of evidence requirements like they do in the U.S. And so an innocence project, say in Italy or Spain, wants to investigate a case where someone's been in prison screaming innocence for 20 years, they might find that the evidence has been destroyed and all the police reports and everything. That used to be the case in the U.S., but because of the innocence movement, we've passed preservation laws in most states now, so they're required to save them. Another problem that I've seen in Europe is that many of the countries do not have what we call public records laws that we have in the U.S. When we start an investigation, we send a letter to the police department and the prosecutor's office and demand their file from the case 20, 30 years ago. And under law, they're required to turn the file over to us so we can see all the investigation that was done, and we can see if they hid evidence and other things like that. Now, many times they don't comply, and we have to send many letters, and we have to sue them in court to try to get it. And so it's not like it's a friendly, cooperative process, but the law does exist, and many times we can get the file. In many of the countries in Europe, they do not yet have public record laws. Some of them do, but not all, and so that also makes it more difficult. But at least the causes and the basic structure of reopening a case with new evidence exists in most countries.
In Italy, every year, about 1,000 people are compensated for being in prisons, being innocent, for pretrial detention, most of all. Is it a problem also in U.S.? And what kind of dimensions has it?
That is a rare problem in the U.S. That does not happen very often. There was a recent case where somebody was held in prison because of an error, and I think they were mentally infirm, and they stayed in prison for like decades. before their trial. But that is very rare in the U.S. Usually our wrongful convictions involve somebody who goes to trial and is convicted, but they end up being innocent. But what you're describing in Italy of pretrial detention and getting compensation is very common in many parts of the world. In fact, in Africa, even in South Africa, sometimes people are held in prison for 7 or 10 years, and then they're acquitted at trial, and there's no evidence. And they've been held pre-trial for many, many, many years.
Yeah, it's not so grateful for us Italian and the judicial system in Italy to be compared to country like the African one. That does it mean that Italy is a bit back comparing to other countries talking about pre-trial detentions?
I mean, I can't answer that question because the first time I heard about that was from you, that has a problem, and I don't know the extent of it in Italy. Are they holding people for 7 or 10 years before trial?
No, just maximum 6 years.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to judge whether it means they're back. Every problem has their country. Every country has their problems. But that's the other place where I've seen that very, very prevalent is in African countries.
In Italy, when a judge goes wrong, he's not directly responsible for his mistake. Do you think that it could be a way to solve or prevent a wrongful conviction if a judge could be sued by a single person who's been victim of his mistake?
Well, in the U.S., most of the time, the mistake is not with the judge. Usually it's the police officer or the prosecutor, and many times it's an honest mistake. I mean, they were maybe not trained properly. They don't understand tunnel vision. They don't understand confirmation bias. They don't understand the problems in forensics. So there's somebody who's working within the system the way they were trained. The system is at fault. Their training is at fault. In the United States, there is a way to sue police officers if there's intentional misconduct. And I do think that gives incentives for people to do it right, because after you have some jurisdictions like New York City or Chicago that have paid millions and tens of millions, the taxpayers start saying, wait a minute, you better clean up how you investigate crimes because we're sick of paying this money. It's like in the tort reforms when the companies are stuck with big bills to pay in class actions because their products were not safe and injured people. That makes the companies get more efficient and more safe. And so I personally think when you can show that there was a bad actor who was reckless or negligent, was not acting maybe in complete good faith, that holding them personally responsible gives, or at least the department responsible, incentivizes these departments to reform and be more careful. That's how you get people to be. When you give people no accountability whatsoever, and they're never held accountable for problems, that's when you start getting lazy, and that's when mistakes start happening. There have been movements in the United States to limit accountability. Police and prosecutors have tried to limit their accountability, and that's an ongoing political struggle. But I think it's one way to make sure that we do the best we can and incentivize people to do the best we can.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.